Welcome to Hemp Talks, everyone. It's a really exciting time to be in hemp. And for those of you who don't know us, Hemp Talks was born in the aftermath of multiple hemp industry event cancellations. And we're here to provide a channel for information sharing and supply chain connectivity. Hemp Talks is sponsored by High Grade Hemp Seed, and we're filling the gap with content, conversation, and expert advice like our town hall today. We're pleased to host this town hall in partnership with our friends at Hilo Hemp Seed. We may be competitors on the hemp genetics front, but we're definitely partners united in moving the hemp industry forward. And helping farmers succeed is the path to accomplishing that goal. So I'd just like to thank Hilo for working with us to help the industry grow together. Throughout the panel, you can join the conversation using the hashtag hemptalks. And we welcome you to check out more content on our website at hemptalks.today. To kind of frame our town hall and what was the impetus for us hosting this event, we've been hearing a lot of high-level farming best practices, but it's been pretty rare to actually take a deep dive into a geographic region and really explore the details of what's going on in fields as we progress through a growing season. So this town hall conversation is designed to accomplish precisely that. We're going to take a look at the Western United States today, and from integrated pest management to nutrition and soil fertility to regional differences in field conditions. We have a panel of farming experts, and they're going to share real-time local advice and try to help all of you in your own fields. So I'd like to take a minute and welcome our panelists today. Kyle is here from Agrarian Supply, Kyle Truesdell. He's currently involved in multiple agricultural focused companies and is the co-CEO at Agrarian Supply, which he also co-founded. At the start of his career, he spent 6 years in organic farming and fresh food processing as a sales manager at Earthbound Farm. He also spent 7 years at Wilbur Ellis Company, holding the positions of National Specialty Crop Portfolio Manager, a retail branch manager, and pest control advisor. He's got over 15 years of agricultural sales, strategy, and management experience. And for the last 5 years, he's been dedicated a lot of his time to developing go-to-market strategies for the entrance of traditional agriculture into the hemp industry. So thanks for joining us, Kyle. Really happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I'll introduce Kevin Nowell next. Kevin is the head of farmer relations at Hilo Hemp Seed in Colorado. He was born and raised outdoors. He's a hardcore hands in the dirt farmer. His grandfather grew up on a dairy, corn, and hay farm in Minnesota, and Kevin did extensive research and taught himself how to farm certified organic vegetables in California. When he saw that hemp was headed toward legalization, he learned everything that he could about the plant and the industry, and he now shares that knowledge at hemp conferences, farm visits, and in direct communication with all the farmers who choose Hilo seed. So welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Eric Sykes coming live from his beautiful field. Hi, Eric.
Hi, thanks for having me.
He's the vice president and founder of Organics Alive, and Eric's a Southern California native. When he's not working, he's usually at the beach in the mountains. He has a really deep connection to nature, and it drives him to spread his passion for Organics Alive worldwide. He really loves to help other farmers. He's got 20 years of soil, fertilizer, and farming experience, and really brings a wealth of knowledge to their customers and our town hall today. So again, thanks for joining us, Eric.
Thank you.
Let's all get started. I want you to know that this is kind of an open conversation. We're going to take questions for a large chunk of time at the end of our town hall. But there's a QA feature at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little QA if you mouse down at the bottom of your Zoom window. And just use that to share your questions with us as we go. If we're talking about a topic and it interests you and you've got a question, go ahead and send it to us. We'll work it into the conversation if we can. And if not, I will get to as many questions as possible at the end of our session. So I think to get started, the best thing for us to do is to just let each of you panelists share for a few minutes a summary of the field conditions in your states of operation. We'd love to just hear high level some information about challenges, what's working, if there are any regional nuances that are going on with field conditions this year. So I don't know if one of you would like to get started, but let's just have a little summary of what's going on where you are.
I guess I can go ahead and start since I'm sitting in the field right now. Currently, this field is our first year running this field. We scraped it and it was native soil. So this is the first planting we have going on out here in this field. So it's been a really interesting experience getting to develop it and get everything online out here. We're doing several different trials from seedlings to from seedling varieties to clone varieties to see what works best in our climate. We're down in San Diego County, Eastern Foothills, near Warner Springs in Ranchita. We're at 3,200 feet elevation. It's a very dry, temperate climate in that we also have oak trees and shrub brush around here. So it's not quite desert. It's definitely slightly mountainous. We do get snow cover a couple of times a year. So we will have to deal with maybe some cold, depending on how long the season goes. But currently right now, it's just the main thing is keeping the babies watered and fed and getting ready to start treating anything that comes in the field. You know, we've had a lot of battles since this is a new area to be farmed. We're learning how intense kind of the, not necessarily pest pressure, but the pressure we're getting on to get to our irrigation system. You know, it's pretty sparse for water out here. So we're getting a lot of crows that peck the lines and gophers and coyotes and you name it. So, you know, we're really learning about this zone as much as we are about the plant at the same time while we're out here. We're also operating 2 greenhouses. One of them we've used as the nursery to bring in all of the cuttings and the seedlings for germination. And we hand planted everything out in the field. We're doing everything organic. As per CDFA and USDA guidelines, everything we have is OMRI, CDFA certified organic, and we're using all organic fertilizers and amendments. We got in the ground a little late, about July 4th, on some of the cuttings right behind us. So they've been in the ground a few weeks, but they definitely took really well, and they're coming in great. And so yeah, we're really blessed to be here, and we're excited to see kind of what the area has to offer. We never know if we'll get monsoonal rain up from the desert. You know, we could get rainstorms, or we can get wind and dry, or we could, you know, this weekend it's going to get over 100 degrees. So we'll have to deal with a little bit of heat as well. So there's a lot of elements we get to work with up here, but it's, you know, it's definitely fun. And it keeps us on our toes all the time. You can see right now we're getting our afternoon breeze starting to come in. So yeah, hopefully the tent stays down.
Yeah, it's great. The field looks beautiful. It was really helpful, Eric. Kevin, you want to go next?
Yeah, I mean, out here we're also in California, so I mean it's hot and dry this time of year. Our area is very similar to that of Eric's. You know, I think we've got some of the areas on the coast. You know, as we're really close to the coast, you know, we kind of have our June gloom going on in some areas, and maybe some mold pressures, but you know, hot and dry summertime. I'm starting to see some aphid pressure out in the fields, a little bit of thrips here and there, but nothing's going too crazy yet. I know heading into this next month or so, as the plants start transitioning into flowering, you know, over the course of the next month, I expect you know, caterpillar pressure to pick up a bit. But otherwise, you know, things have been pretty mild this year. I think we've only had a handful of days over 100 degrees, and I think the plants are very thankful for that. Whereas normally we'd have, you know, dozens and dozens of days over 100. So this year, so far so good. It seems mild compared to normal. I don't know if that's what y'all are experiencing as well, but yeah.
Great to hear. Thanks so much. Kyle, how about you? What's going on where you are?
Well, we've got operations all over the state, but it is pretty uniform, depending on, you know, the areas, some outliers. But overall, between what Kevin and Eric said, I mean, we're starting to see insect pressure more typically in a drier winter, in a warmer and dry summer. You're going to see a lot more insect pressure. Not a lot of mildew pressure, not a lot of pathogen pressure, and, you know, not a lot of weed pressure because you didn't have enough rain to go ahead and get everything germinated and get a lot of, you know, weeds to sprout. But that's typically what we're seeing. Again, as well as what Kevin said, aphids starting to pop up, thrip. Of course, mite pressure, usually in the dry, windy, and dusty areas, mite pressure will pick up, you know, drastically. And, you know, there has been, even though it's been pretty, just average weather as far as the temperature goes, we have had some spikes, here or there with some heat that have, had some explosions of mite, infestations pop up. But overall, it's, again, overall plant health, irrigation practices, making sure you keep your plants watered and also make sure they're healthy. Getting them with a biological and nutritional program that's solid enough to condition the soil as well as create, a beneficial microbial population that allows the plant's overall health to increase and withstand, whether it be, a heat spell or, insects, pathogen. But, typically right now it's fighting heat, fighting, water availability, and, insect pressure.
Gotcha. We're definitely going to get more into field operations, but before we do that, I'd really like to understand the impact of genetics on farmers' end results. If each of you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes and sharing your perspective on how important genetics are to either make or break.
Sure. I'll start since I went last. I mean, after 2019 really being the really big first year, everybody was getting into, production scaled operations for hemp, specifically in the region that we're in. Everybody's still looking at genetics and vetting them out. It's absolutely was probably the biggest topic of every conversation everywhere I was at in 2019, and then obviously rolling into 2020. So understanding specific geographical regions based off of, your lat and longitude, it's extremely important. And right now, the genetic bank that's out there and availability is still extremely limited if you look at it in comparison to production agriculture that sits today and other large scale production crops. We're just barely scratching the surface of what is going to be available in genetics in the future compared, as what's on the market today. And like what Eric's doing, looking at different trial genetics, I know Kevin's done a lot of this work, understanding, are you going to be using seed traditionally? Are you going to be doing transplants and actually popping seeds in a greenhouse? What's the cost benefit of that? And going forward, how's that going to look as, the market and things get commoditized and your margins start to compress? But it starts with genetics. Absolutely, first thing.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kyle said, and I think I think it's very important to vet your genetics and run the trials just like Eric's doing right now. Run the trials in your area. Everybody's environment, climate conditions are different, soil fertility, how you actually, your influence and your fertility on that plant. There's just like farming any crop, there's so many factors that boil into the performance, the overall performance of that crop. And it's can't stress enough to run the variety trials and see what works for you in your area. Something that might work for you on your property might not work for the guy 5 miles down the road if you have two totally different soil types and microclimates, kind of so on and so forth. It's crucial to get your genetics figured out and get them figured out in the early years, and you work towards dialing in your operation that much sooner, because ultimately, like Kyle said, margins are going to compress, and we are already seeing that. But as that happens year over year, much more of a reason for you to dial in your operation, figure out what works for you. And then, I guess we're starting to see a lot of the, a lot of the companies that maybe are, I don't know, not the top-notch companies who are truthful and honest. We're starting to see them get pushed out of the industry, I think. And so kind of the cream is rising to the top, if you will. And so I think, as time goes on, that's going to, just further, and what we see should hopefully be getting better and better, and we should start seeing real regionality in these genetics. Like what, kind of to piggyback a little more on what Kyle was saying, is the variability amongst genetics in the market. There's so much shared lineage amongst what we have right now, and so as time goes on, it's going to be really interesting to see genetics that are really dialed in for a certain region and climate, because right now it's kind of, you know, there's the states that got the jump on developing genetics just because they got in when everything was 2014 Farm Bill. So that if you've been at it for 5 or 6 years now, you're ahead of the game. But you know, some of those states don't necessarily represent your climates across the country. And so as now with 2018 Farm Bill, as we have more and more states coming online, you know, we kind of need genetics to be developed for those regions. And you know, whether it's you know, pest resistances or fungal, bacterial, disease resistances, those things are going to be very important moving into the future.
Very good. How about you, Eric?
No, I agree 100%. You know, that's why right away we started working with HGH, and you know, I know I've had conversation with you guys out in Palm Springs as well with Hilo, and you know, you have to trust your breeder, and when you're putting an investment like that into your project, for a farmer, it's not just $1 to spend, but it's $100 to earn, you know. And so, you know, if you have to throw every seed you throw away, you're not necessarily throwing away $1, you're throwing away 100. And so that's, you know, as a farmer, that's now I finally realize how important that is, you know. And we work with also other groups, you know, from down in Palm Desert. You know, they need a completely genetic set than what is going to be needed up on the North Coast area, you know. So, you know, trying to figure out the auto flowers versus the full terms and what's really, you know, the best for your game plan, whether you want to plant every 2 weeks an auto flower, then harvest every 2 weeks, or whether you want everything to go full term, you know. And I don't know if you can really see behind me, but you could see the difference in kind of the green color variations out there from the genetics that we're trying, from cherry wine to Trump to Spectrum. You know, we have the HGH cherry wine, we have the HGH Matterhorn, we have Berry Blossom, we have Zinfandel. So yeah, we're doing trials on in every end to try to figure out clone versus seed, you know, what we can nail down to be the best, get our best end product.
No, that's great to hear. I have a question for you, Eric, before we move on, from Ming Lee, and thanks for this question. What's your go-to product in the Organics Alive line that you love using on your farm, and why?
Right now, it's been our FPF, which is our fermented plant fulvic, where we ferment down grains and we receive a lot of amino acids, enzymes, and some fulvic acid in there. And that's helping us to drop our pH in our water. So we're almost using that as an acidifier, while it's also bringing in the minerals and the acids and the aminos and everything else we want into the system. And we're also using our VN, which is our nitrogen dry soluble fertilizer. That soluble fertilizer has no salt, and it's 100% soluble. So we're able to inject it into our lines with the FPF at the same time. So we're feeding and we're knocking down the pH with not just an acidifier, but with something that's going to also add value to the solution at the same time.
Very good.
But thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like, we've got kind of a results report from Dr. Carrillo, who's growing a couple of high-grade genetics using biologicals, nanotechnology, and building soil diversity, as well as using ground covers to reduce weed pressure and management, which we'll probably touch on at some point. Looks like he's got 2 strains that are doing very well with limited rainfall and stress, and also insects. Very good growing conditions in New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado. So thanks for sharing that. Let's move on. Why don't we talk about IPM? You guys all touched on that in your debriefs in the beginning. And before we get too in depth in what's going on in fields at the moment, can each of you share a little bit of advice on how to run a preventative program so that farmers don't have to react but can be proactive with IPM? Do you have some good tips for preventative IPM in the Western US?
I could start that first, I guess. For us, really, it's all about having the right, you know, biological set to begin with, because if you have an imbalance in the field and you don't have any microorganisms, you have a high potential to allow a pathogen to enter first before you get all your good guys. So with our philosophy is we want we want to infiltrate our field with as many beneficial microorganisms and beneficial plants that we can in the beginning. That way we're powering up our natural defenses right away. So as much beneficial microbe and get your biological count as high as you can to kind of like I say, occupy all the parking spaces. That way when the pathogen tries to come in, there's nowhere for it to land. That would be one. And then also, you know, just really be on your field and checking your leaves and look under a microscope. And, you know, sometimes if you see it, it's too late. So make sure you're also getting into a preventative spray program. There's, you know, you might want to consult the PCA near your area for the right, you know, biochemicals that you would want to use to make sure they're all natural and definitely compliant for what the hemp is needed to put on it. So you're not spraying anything that's potentially harmful to the end user.
Yeah. And I think to piggyback on Eric, you know, in addition to your biologicals, I think there's you know, an emphasis on just fertility and dialing in fertility. A healthy plant is going to have a, you know, a natural immune system, just like any human or animal. Plants are the same way. So if your fertility's dialed in, you're going to have less issues to begin with. It's not that you won't have issues, but it's less likely that you're going to have major issues. So getting your fertility dialed in, and I think we're all believers in organic here. And so, you know, really getting biologicals dialed in, and, you know, biologicals go hand in hand with fertility. A lot of biologicals are, when I say that, microbiology is unlocking and assisting the plant with, you know, making fertility bioavailable to the plants, and just improving overall health of the system.
Great. Anything you want to add, Kyle?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, you know, as what you said, Trish, and your, you know, description of it is, you know, it's preventative. So to be preventative, you have to plan. You have to plan ahead. You've got to understand, you know, number one, if you are the farmer that is also paying the bill, is what's your budget? You know, being in the industry as far as agricultural chem manufacturing, retail, nutrition, biological organic products are the most expensive. And with a crop that has extremely limited products that are federally approved by the EPA to actually be applied to hemp, your toolbox is very small. So, you know, with saying that, you've got to identify which product those are, understand the frequency in which they need to be used to be preventative, and how that affects your pocketbook. So that planning piece has to, you know, take place very early, you know, hopefully several months before the season you put anything in the ground. And then knowing, you know, what these specific products do. Biologicals sometimes gets used as a catch-all and the bug in a jug description, but they're very really specific to what they do and have, you know, very specific modes of action. So, you know, some are soil conditioners, some are plant health enhancers, some help with just uptake, some help with the biological, you know, populations within your soil. So just knowing all of that and doing the research and your homework is really important to be preventative with the program. And then knowing the growth stages specific to your region that, you know, also associated to your genetics, so that you can have that plan in place, and then looking at what potential issues are going to pop up based off the time of year and the, you know, at the stage of the growth of the plant. So, you know, you really got to dial it in to be preventative. There's no tool in the toolbox for the hemp grower right now that has any reach back or eradication that is true to what systemic chemistry does today for, you know, most cropping systems.
A good question from Todd. What are each of you using for microbials? Any advice, any favorites?
You know, we actually have a couple branded products that we use. I mean, not to promote our brand, but, you know, we're sticking and looking at specifically products that are soil conditioners that help not only with the native population and the overall viability of the soil, but we're also looking at soil conditioners that help with water retention, which is extremely important in areas where you have less water. And in California this year, we just have less water everywhere. Very important. And then we're really starting to identify some plant health enhancers that are distilled phenolics that are extracted through specific processes for a concentrate, and pyroligneous acids are extremely important. And we're seeing a lot of amazing response by the plants, almost too good to be true. And one thing I've really noticed about hemp, though, in general, is I've farmed 50 other crops, is in the biological space, hemp loves biological products more than anything. I mean, you can use, hemp has been used in remediation. So it likes to mine, it likes to get things out of the soil. And if you're putting really healthy and really, strategic products within the soil itself and getting that balance, it's going to take it up and utilize it, and you get great results. So, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily any specific product or brands, more the category, things that are soil conditioners, microbial population enhancers, and plant health, enhancers.
Really helpful. Kevin, Eric, anything to add to that? All right.
Yeah. Oh, I could just go ahead, Kevin.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, compost tea. Compost tea is always going in my garden once a week. At the minimum. There are some specific brands that I guess I'm behind when it comes to soil biology. I'm a backer of Tanio. I'm a backer of Coast Bio, and really anything that Agrarian or Organics Alive puts out. But yeah, I mean, building biology is soil biology. And then when it comes to, biologicals for IPM, like Kyle said, I mean, we have a very small list of products that are approved by the EPA, which would be accepted by all the states. For me personally, what tops the list is anything that Marone Biosciences puts out. They have very good products. I trust them. I've used them, and they're obviously, if you have good, good spray equipment and you get good coverage, it can perform very well. So that's, if you're looking for brands or anything specific, that's kind of where I'm at.
Great. Anything you wanted to add, Eric?
I definitely agree with the teas. Making up brewing up the biology fresh and getting to deliver that into the field is a very effective way. We have our system that we use with our mix kits and our bio extractors, and then also cover crop was another thing that we did this year. We put down a real diverse cover crop for the off season to help with that biodiversity further, and we tilled it in, and just really managing that diversity at the same time is really important.
Great to hear. I know that insect control is always a huge issue in the summer months. It sounds like it's not a huge problem this year, but are you seeing any trends in the Western US in terms of mites, thrift, caterpillars, anything like that you see as a problem? It's good news if the answer is a no.
Yeah. Personally, I'm seeing aphids and thrips in my area right now.
Okay.
We haven't seen any major mite pressures yet. We always have caterpillars, so I'll give it a month before those really hit us, but they're coming. It's gonna happen. So yeah.
Kyle and Eric, are you guys seeing any emerging trends on the insect front?
I had my first experience with leaf cutting ants in the field. That was our first insect pressure, which was really interesting. The new cuttings that we dropped down, the ants were going up, just sawing off the leaves and dragging it straight down the hole. And I had never witnessed that before, except for in the rainforest in Costa Rica. So that was, that. And then other than like insectal pest, it's just been the animal pressure that we're getting more than anything on the water. Not necessarily the plants either. The bunny rabbits haven't ate the plants. The gophers aren't even pulling the plants down. The deer don't eat the plants. They want the water. The crows and everything are just trying to peck into our water lines.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that before with different, vertebrates that, they just chewing up irrigation lines. They'll go out there and just chew them up. And if you don't have some kind of SOP in place on how you manage irrigation, not just from when you're going to turn it on, when you're going to turn it off, how much you're going to actually water, but someone walking the lines, making sure that there isn't a broken line, a plugged line, something is not functioning correctly from a mechanical standpoint, not necessarily directly related to a deficiency or pest standpoint. But right now, thrips and mites are the things that we're seeing. I know in 7 years as a PCA on a few crops, I never treated for thrips one time. And here we are this year with hemp treating for thrips. So there's the effect they have and the damage they cause on hemp versus some other crops warrants some type of application that was part of your program to be again applied. And like what Kevin said in regards to IPM, Marone's got some really good products. Venerate's a really good product when you're dealing with insects. And then again, just the practices, good coverage, making sure your equipment's calibrated correctly and you have somebody trained well enough to do it and is paying attention and being effective.
Great. Moving on from pests of all shapes and sizes, but what's the situation this season with pathogens? Are you seeing anything emerge as a problem?
No. That's a good year for pathogens. There's not a lot. So fungicides are not a big sell this year for any products. I mean, it's been pretty mild, extremely mild.
Before we move off of this subject, I do have one question that's kind of related to pests. We've seen some migration from neighboring crops such as corn or alfalfa after harvesting, moving into hemp. So are there any preventative applications for hemp prior to harvest of other crops that might help prevent that, that migration? Does that make sense?
I'm assuming that's an insect migration. Pathogens specifically are usually, for a certain crop, even though you might have mildew across crops, the mildew that affects one typically doesn't affect another. But again, it is still all biology. At some point, there could be an evolution of that. But that's what happens. I mean, if you're farming in the foothills and as soon as everything dries down, all the insects come into your field right below because their food source and habitat's gone, and they're looking for their next food source, the next habitat. So really, some of the things you can do is doing like perimeter buffer crops, like putting in a host crop, some type of flower. I know a lot of people use a bunch of different things. You can put sunflowers around the edges of the field, giving the insects another host habitat and food source so they don't affect the one that you're trying to monetize. Those are, buffer crop, whatever you want to call perimeter crops. It's one thing you can do to try to, reduce that infestation. Yeah.
Eric, Kevin, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I'm always gonna being the organic farmer. I'm always gonna promote beneficials and having hedgerows and all your beneficial plantings for more or less bankers and attracting all your natives. I mean, ultimately, if you can establish populations of natives, obviously you have to have land and native space dedicated to it, and plantings of perennials and annuals that are dedicated to it. But ultimately, you have native bugs in your area that are going to eat, the beneficials that are going to eat the bad bugs. And if you can draw large amounts of them to your property and or create habitat for them, it's not necessarily something you can do overnight. It's more of a long-term plan. But if that's something you have the option to do, and you're gonna be on that land for a while, that's something I would, that's just kind of a best practices in organic agriculture. Yeah.
Great.
I'd back that up 100%. When that goes into the diversity, making sure that you have that biodiversity present throughout your land and is available, and then really keeping that diversity present. And then for us, same thing, going back to that that biological standpoint, that we can increase the beneficial biology to such great numbers that we're almost creating vibrations by them, that when these pests want to fly by the field, they can sense the plant's health and literally smell that health and they're going to fly right past that field and head down to the next one because you're sending out signals of health, and they won't even invade into that. They won't even want to break that barrier because they know they can't chew that plant because it's too strong for them to get through,
That's a great segue, Eric, into my next question. I know that fields are transitioning right now from vegetative growth to flowering, and this is a major stress event for the plant. What can farmers do to help support their plants during this time frame when they're a little bit vulnerable?
Definitely nutrition. Make sure that they aren't being lacking any nutritional. You can do a tissue sample test really easily and be able to run that off to the lab to measure kind of really what's going on at this point in the season. I wouldn't be afraid to do that, or even a quick soil sample. If you did one in the beginning of the season and you can read that now versus your tissue sample, you can see what is being taken up and what's being needed and supplement real easily through the lines. You definitely common deficiencies are, calcium, magnesium for feeding hemp plants for a lot of people, nitrogen, potassium. Yeah. So, really make sure that they have all the food that they need in order to grow. And then, of course, the microbial presence to help with that buffering of that transition to provide any micro, nuance that they need.
That's a good point, Eric. And actually, I'd love Kyle and Kevin if you could touch on that as well, because it was one of our questions from Alan in the audience. Do you use lab analysis at various stages as a tool for crop optimization? And Eric, it sounds like that's really crucial to your operations. So I guess as we talk about this stress period and how to support the plants, if lab analysis is a piece of that, let us know what you're doing.
So part of our program is we take weekly tissue samples, leaf blade samples that give the best representation of the field that we're in. Extremely important is the foundation of our nutritional program. A base soil samples taken in the beginning of the year to understand what the what your reserves are within the soil, what you might need to apply pre-plant, but it's absolutely critical to watch the nutritional demand curves. Nitrogen's the limiting factor in every crop. Number one, in the vegetation phase, nitrogen, phosphorus. As you start to transition, nitrogen, but most importantly, you start getting into more potassium needs. And what Eric mentioned, your cal-mag ratio or calcium-magnesium ratios are extremely important to understand where you're at there, so they don't compete against each other in the cation exchange process to become one more available than the other. Calcium is very important in the overall development in trying to put on biomass to increase your yields. So we do weekly tissue samples and analyze them and then make action plan, based off of those, understanding what those demands are at, what could be limited, what might be abundant to not allow within the exchange process for something to become more abundant in the plant than the other. That might help either give too much growth in a certain way, like stretch out the internodes, whatnot, but also so that you're not limiting yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what both Eric and Kyle said, and the one big thing that I've learned over the years is that most of us are not applying enough calcium, and because the plant, you would have to be extremely deficient to see a calcium deficiency in the plant, and so a lot of times calcium is a limiting factor. You don't see it, so you don't think of it as a limiting factor, but calcium's highly overlooked. I mean, I would throw it up there with NPK if I could, and so and not to dismiss any other micros, but calcium is just, it's one of those things. When you start getting it right in your system, you will very quickly realize that it was a limiting factor, even though you couldn't visibly see a deficiency.
Yeah, one thing, Kevin, just like add to that, in looking at a nutritional program, we talk a lot here about the importance of microbials, but microbials, in a sense, are not where the nutrition's coming from. The microbials are helping to increase availability and efficiency of use of the minerals that you actually need. to grow the plant. So they are there to enhance and help, and to help, make things more effective. But, a biological microbial program alone is not going to give you the NPK, calcium, every other thing essential that you need to grow the plant. So those are in addition to
Right.
a nutritional program.
Right. All that fertility still has to be there to make
Yeah.
it bioavailable.
Sure, totally makes sense. Before we kind of move off of the subject of nutrition, for the flowering phase that's coming, and as farmers get closer to harvest, what are some of the nutritional requirements that they should be on the lookout for, or potentially some of the shifts in how they're fertilizing that will help them set up for a strong late season? Is there
I'm
anything?
gonna let Kyle hit that.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's later in the year. It's potassium's number one. I mean, that's what's gonna, produce cannabinoids, which you're farming. If you're looking for CBD, and that is a luxury item within the plant for it to produce. So if it's not surviving and it's not healthy enough to even just survive and reach maturity, you're not going to accumulate cannabinoids in the plant. And potassium is what helps drive that. I mean, just like other fruits where potassium helps drive your sugar, your Brix level. That's what it does for cannabinoids. So, and don't be afraid to use a little bit more nitrogen than you probably would, because nitrogen helps act as the carrier, if you will, for the potassium to become more plant available. Potassium almost piggybacks on it in a way. So a little bit of nitrogen, but I mean, obviously more potassium is important.
Yeah.
Great. Eric, anything you wanted to add on that subject of kind of transitioning into late season fertilization and nutrients?
Yeah, we've been growing cannabis for a long time, and our product line we've really developed with that similar, taking it through the plant. We have a 10-2-2 we start with, a 4-5-5 as we go in transition, then we go into a 0-10-8, and then a 0-2-10 to finish with. So we really take the plant all the way through the end, and we still maintain our nitrogen through our top dressing and other and the teas and other ways to keep everything green through the end. But yeah, so we've really, knowing that entire plant cycle and being able to feed the plant properly, and knowing your nutrition, what you're needing in the field, is really going to be the key to success. So you're not just wasting money by adding nutrients you may not necessarily need, or not adding the right ones at the right time.
Great.
One other thing was just, sorry to just jump back in, but
Yeah.
a foliar application sometimes towards the end, I mean, that's a quick fix, because if you are seeing something drastically different and change that is obviously a concern keeping you up at night, a tissue sample, leaf blade sample, understanding if you're way under potassium, you can get a foliar application and get something within the plant within 24 hours. A soil, fertigation through your drip system. If you're farming in soil, like in the native ground, and you're not in pots or doing something crazy like more what a cannabis side would do, but it takes 7 days for that to go through the cation exchange process, get into the soil solution, and be taken up by the plant to be utilized. So a 7-day window sometimes can be a long time. So a foliar application of a certain nutrient, potassium is, again, typically the one that you're lacking, is always also a nice little band-aid solution. It's definitely not the protocol for all of your fertility program, but it's a good way to get a little shot of whatever you're missing into the plant within a 24-hour period.
Yeah, and then to just tag on that a little bit, the one thing to really keep in mind, and it obviously depends on what's going on in your soil to begin with, but soil applications, you can see things get tied up pretty quick. So, I was emphasizing calcium earlier. Calcium, some soils will absolutely gobble up your calcium, and it's not bioavailable to that plant any longer. And so, that's where you can really get ahead strategically with the foliars. I'm glad you brought that up, Kyle.
Yeah, and micronutrients are even worse than calcium when it comes to soil applications. They are just low cation exchange, so they are outcompeted always. So if you are really deficient micronutrient wise, a foliar application is really the only way to get into the plant. You won't get it into the soil.
Right. All the micro metals, right? all the
Yeah.
sulfates. Yeah.
Great,
Yeah,
great.
we're big fans of foliar. Big fans of that.
No, great advice, guys. I'd encourage all of you to submit your questions. We want to get to as many as possible, so load up the queue if there's some things that you'd like to know. Before we transition to some Q&A to close out, are there any other in-season factors that farmers should be watching out for to have the best possible crop at harvest time? Any other tips or advice that each of you want to share?
Logistics. Make sure you've got your labor force ready to go.
Yeah. How are you going to dry that crop? Who are you going to sell it to?
Well, I mean, we got
maybe
this,
it's too late for that if you already planted, but
right. Even with COVID and this whole, all the quarantine and everything, even though agriculture has been one of the industries that has been given a pretty lax set of, rules to be able to continue to operate, because, farming doesn't stop. I don't care what happened, what's going on. We're not making widgets. We're using, Mother Nature to produce, food and products for the world to consume. So, labor is tight. It's hard right now. So making sure you know where you're going to have your people to do it. You can do it on time.
how are you going to harvest it and how are you going to get it shelf stable?
Either buy a big extractor or take your extractor out to dinner a couple of times in the next couple of months and offer to babysit their kids.
Smart.
That's
Become real good friends with your extractor.
That's a good point, though. Have you guys seen any ripple effects from the COVID outbreak? I agree, Kyle, that like overall the hemp farming industry hasn't been as hard hit, obviously, as some other sectors. But what effect are you seeing of the pandemic on your operations?
Unfortunately, I'm starting to hear a lot of information from the, medical industry, specifically doctors that family, friends, people that I know that agriculture right now has one of the highest positive cases of COVID. And I think obviously it probably is what has happened with there being the lax, regulations in regards to continuing to operate. But that has been more identified. It's going to be not outdoor farming, more the people that are indoor. Nurseries are probably going to be, what I look at is probably one of the greater risks. But I think there's probably more to come in regards on how truly it's affected the industry, because it's kind of not being talked about a whole lot right now, but that's what I'm hearing out there. And it's people within processing facilities, people that are enclosed jobs, not necessarily offices, but that are in the production side of agriculture that have jobs that require them to be inside.
Yeah. I've heard, similar things and, like with, processors, throughput is down just because they're trying to maintain social distancing and, obey all protocols. And so if they have to run it, at half capacity, then that's what they have to do. And so, I'm seeing some folks with throughput down. I've had conversations with numerous farmers where because of the timing of everything going into the year, they lost their forward contracts, who they sold to last year, who they had contracts with. Those folks did not want to do forwards contracts this year because there was so much uncertainty. And I don't necessarily blame them, but yeah, those farmers didn't plant. They decided they would rather not plant than, gamble on hopefully having somebody to buy it at the end of the season, which, we know that's really the boat that most people are in to begin. Yeah.
How about you,
for us,
Garrett? Are you seeing any COVID ripple effects?
For us, it was in a little bit of our tangible items that we're trying to get for our greenhouses, just like some fans and a few other things that had some deliveries postponed or, just delayed, that got us pushed back a few weeks in our season. So that really, there was just a couple delays as far as the farm is concerned. And as far as Organics Alive, the fertilizer entity, we really just, we were blessed and able to just kind of keep manufacturing and keep moving through the whole process.
It's really good to hear.
Yeah.
A note came in from Tracy. We're using nano calcium and nano potassium, which is 100% available and does not get tied up. So just a comment from our attendees. Thanks for sharing that. I have a question from Gregory. Can you please share your thoughts about inbreeding depression in hemp genetics?
My first thought right off the bat is true selective breeding versus a lot of folks you see doing open pollinations. And open pollinations, you're just not, you're not making proper selections necessarily, and ultimately you're diluting these varieties further and further every time you open pollinate. And so I think when it comes to best practices and avoiding that, it's either having clonal mother and father plants, or if you're furthering generations, it's really tracking your traits that you're selecting for and making those culls. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies that aren't doing that because it's all about quantity of production when it comes to seed production, whereas really they should be, traditional selection and culling that's huge to advancing the genetics, versus open pollination is going to further dilute. That's my first thought right off the bat.
Good points. Kyle and Eric, do you have any POV on that?
I think there's a lot of work in the genetic space that needs to be done. The biggest issues we've seen have a lot come from the fact that the genetics that are currently being used today come from specific regions, and they have years of crossbreeding, open pollen. Just years and years of really pollution within the genetic line, that there needs to be, if you will, a complete overhaul of the genetics industry, and forward focused on specific geographical regions, and also now looking at what the market is going to be demanding as far as hemp products in the future. There's a lot of people looking at still on cannabinoids, and the future of hemp is unfortunately not farming cannabinoids. The future of hemp is going to be grain and fiber, and that's when, and oil, that's when it's going to become one of the largest commodities and and grown products in the world.
Yeah, I agree. As long as when on the medicinal, cannabinoid side of things, as long as we're talking about consuming milligrams of a compound, that's going to cap out very, very quickly. Whereas, like Kyle said, fiber and grain, as those get rolling and as infrastructure develops, those are going to dwarf the cannabinoid market.
Yeah, the cannabinoid market's going to be a niche market.
Yeah.
It'll be niche. The 30 million acres that they forecast in 7 to 10 years within the United States, which would rival alfalfa acres, is going to be grain and fiber, and will have nothing to do with cannabinoids, unless genetics are produced to have a tricrop of some sort, where you can actually pull and have multiple product streams based off of your crop itself, so you get all of it in one. But there's nobody that has that, I can assure you.
Right. It's interesting. I was talking to somebody else in the industry just yesterday, and they were saying the same thing, that it's going to be really interesting as we build a supply chain here in the US and processing capacity for fiber and for other, products to be extracted from hemp biomass, how that's just going to kind of blow the doors off the possibilities far beyond CBD and CBG and some of those hot trends right now. Eric, anything you wanted to share on the inbreeding depression and genetics before we move on?
Just as I've always spent my life looking for different genetics of, THC cannabis and reading those and growing that expression and seeing just so much variety between the sativas and the strong indicas, and then coming into the hemp field and going through all these genetics, there's very similar portraits and everything. We have a couple, different patterns and leaflets and different terpene profiles, but they're all, like you said, it's kind of a muddled gene pool. It's all been kind of, all put into one in a sense. And it'd be interesting to, like you said, really see that some geneticists being able to create a little, different profiles within the legal, numbers, so it's not hot, I guess. And then the CBG has really been interesting to me as well, and getting to learn about that. And that's still trying to unlock my brain about how the CBG doesn't convert into any other cannabinoid. It just stays CBG, the whole time. And, that's kind of a whole nother realm that we're getting into now. So, and then the other part too, that we're also looking at is smokable hemp, is another realm that people are doing to substitute for possible tobacco. And I just wait to see what the ATF and FDA regulations are for that, because nobody can step into that for a little while, I guess, legally.
No, there's interesting times ahead always in hemp.
Yeah.
You kind of touched on something, Eric, that's one more audience question from Alan. Are you concerned about going hot with THC, and what do each of you do to kind of guard against that in your own operations?
We're very concerned, of course, because you lose a lot of money if you go hot. So no farmer wants to do that. So by going to cuttings is one way, because we know the parent was tested and is set. We know what the CBD potential is going to be as well. We're not guessing on a genetic variation that could happen through the seed. And so going from clone is one way. And then going into testing every week from the very beginning of flowers, so you see your ramp up of your THC. Because if you wait and you only test on your last week and you don't know how quickly your spike is coming, and you wait another week, well, you could go way past it and not know. So you definitely need to make sure you're testing your flower consistently throughout the growth of the season, and then pull early, because by the time you start on this end of the field, if you're not really fast, by the time you get to that end of the field, it's going to change. So you're going to start a little early too.
Sure. Kyle and Kevin, any last thoughts on THC?
No, that Eric pretty much nailed it. That's pretty much what you got to do. I mean, the only thing I could potentially add is that the ratio between THC and CBD and the genetics is fairly well defined right out of the gate, and they're related. So if you're only testing for CBD and you're pushing for a higher level, you're dragging the THC up with it. So the nutrition, the way you fertilize, how much you fertilize can affect that. A lot of guys didn't look at that last year and like, oh, I need to hit 16 or I want 14. Well, guess what? They brought the THC up with it and they weren't paying attention. So it's extremely important to know that. But looking at what that ratio is, once you get a baseline, knowing what your goals are target-wise for CBD, you can predict what your THC levels are going to be at a certain point of maturity. But also, get it tested before somebody else comes out and tests you, and don't turn into the world's largest cannabis grower.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it really is testing. It's it's an in-house insurance policy. You don't wait until you're a compliance test. You're testing going into the compliance test. That way, you're good, because you have to call. It might take them a week or two to get out. I know some folks. I talked with a bunch of folks in Arizona who tested hot last year, and it turns out after talking with them, it seems like it was more or less on the state, because it was taking the state more than 2 weeks to get out and test these guys. And it's like, but yeah, oh yeah, exactly. And so that's where it's, you need to know where you are as things are progressing. And, like I said, you just look at that as an insurance policy. Do voluntary testing as the crop matures. That's going to be your biggest protection, more than anything.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I think that we got to the vast majority of the audience questions, and thank you so much for submitting those questions to us. We've just really enjoyed exploring hemp farming in the Western U.S. with everyone. I hope that this conversation will help all of you have a more successful season this year and to come, to continue the dialogue and learn about other upcoming events that we have, and also access a lot of great content from our contributors like Hilo Hemp Seed. Visit our website at hemptalks.today, and everyone have a great evening. Stay healthy out there. Thanks so much, Kyle, Kevin, and Eric.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trish.